Hey, good morning. It is Patrick Global Truth Bomb riffing the con on Tuesday, February 20th, 2024 at approximately 9:30 a.m. my time. And I'm going to take a slightly different track than I normally do because my colleagues have convinced me that there are sort of elements at play that I've recognized for a long time that I have to um, be thoughtful of and try to maneuver around in an effort to upswell what is really the objective, which is, of course, the Clean New Deal. The Clean New Deal is everything that these truth bomb riffs are all about. And I think I'm up to 472 truth bombs on Patrick Level Truth Bombs, the con. So if at all during this riff, I seem to be alluding to something that doesn't make a lot of sense, and that you kind of suspect there might be other aspects at play. I promise you, you can find everything that I have already said that is available on my truth bombs that I think, on a good day, the most viewers I've ever experienced are something along the lines of 2.6 thousand views, which considering the information I have is literally a drop in the bucket. It's nothing. These truth bombs should be seen by millions upon millions of people. And therein lies the odyssey and the obstacles and this mission that I'm on. And really, I just need to transform and be like water and be the avatar and do whatever it takes in every way, manner, shape, or possible to get to where we need to go to get us collectively, the American people, tens of millions of people, to the Clean New Deal. And as I always do, I'm going to start off with kind of a reflection and a refraction of things that are happening in my space that I know are being absorbed by millions of people as well. And so, therefore, that's why I comment on them to sort of bridge what is and what everybody is seeing and realizing and talking about to bring them to the eureka that manifests what it is that could create the Clean New Deal, which at this stage of the game, and again, I'll remind you, it's 2024, should have probably happened 2 decades ago. But here we are. So the thing that I opened up my X feed to this morning, which was really like off the heels of what I went to bed with thinking about, and what is pretty much the focal point of mainstream media at the moment is Yulia Navalny, the wife of Alexei Navalny, pardon me. Russian names are kind of difficult. They're kind of like Polynesian names. They have many syllables. So it's not, very easy to construct if your mind doesn't think in, multiple syllable words that, just roll off the tongue. But the first thing I discovered on X this morning is that she had created an X account and it was immediately, what's the word I'm looking for? When in fact, I'll look it up while I'm here. Why can't I think of the word? Um, just pulling up X now. Just bear with me. And now my loads are happening quite a bit slower. Interestingly, I may have been sabotaged as well. Let's take a look here. If there's, and sometimes that happens. Why can't I see it? This is really interesting. I just posted it 2 minutes ago and it's not there. Really weird. Wow, you're seeing this in real time, me reacting to something that I had just done. I had posted, so Yulia Navalny was, you know, suspended. The account suspended. I mean, she had one follower, and immediately she put up an X account to be able to broadcast what she was going to do. And of course, on the platform of free speech, right? How many times have we heard Elon Musk's, proclaim that the reason he purchased, financed with all sorts of weird partners, including Saudi Arabia, the platform Twitter that he transformed into X as a free speech platform. And of course, what have we seen? We've seen, the guys like Alex Jones and Tucker Carlson and Russell Brand and others completely amplified, and people like me who have the ultimate goods that can take down the whole system that I'm alluding to and we'll get to at some point in this truth bomb. Um, we're throttled down. That's the terminology. And here he did it to Liam Neeson. He suspended Liam Neeson this morning and some other people that show up on my feed that were ridiculing Elon for suspending Yulia Navalny's X account, which, of course, if anybody's been paying attention to Elon Musk, by all things strange weirdness by way of his kind of Afrikaner roots and this sort of connection to Putin and other things that are happening, given Elon's really rarefied air position with the United States government, not just, of course, because of Tesla, but because of SpaceX and the satellites and everything else that are actually on the battlefield. And here I was picking up on this, and I had posted, what I posted regarding Yulia, and I posted the picture of him suspending her account, and it's nowhere to be seen on my feed. I mean, there it is, evidence. It's like this stuff is so easy to identify when you see it, and it's just all a lie. And then the other thing that's insane in addition to this. So on my morning feed, I also posted a thumbnail from something I discovered on YouTube this morning, which I was tweeting about last night, Xing about last night as it was happening in real time as I was watching the Rachel Maddow show, where she was, doing what she does in terms of her riff by way of Alexei Navalny's death and all things Putin and what he's been doing all along and what it means, and the bigger picture from her perspective and what she's been railing about for a long time is aggressive behavior by way of Putin and what he does in this world and why he does it as a threat to all of NATO. And I've had some truth bomb riffs with my colleague, Kevin Howard, where we've discussed that pretty thoroughly, or at least, the whole nature of Ukraine and that sort of thing. And anyway, I can't think of some of the more technical terms that are relevant in terms of who did what and when and how, but that's not the focus of my truth bomb at the moment. And I'm just riffing because I'm trying to do something slightly different than I normally do, because I'm trying to work my way around the board because I have to reach tens of millions of people because of what I just demonstrated, that I'm being censored. I'm being censored in a monumental way because I'm touching upon the thing that the system cannot allow people to understand. And in the case of Elon Musk, I mean, it's obvious, at least in this case with Alexei Navalny and Yulia Navalny and Putin and everything that constructs is crazy. And so, I had posted this morning on X as well, me shaking my head in disgust, because with this Rachel Maddow riff, she leads into this professor of history from New York who lays out what happens when you end up with, and this was the point of the entire piece, institutionalized corruption and autocracy. And meanwhile, here I am saying, oh my God, once again, it's like, look over there, not at to what we're in the midst of, which we have been in the midst of for at least the last 13 years. And ironically, the next feature on Rachel's show was that there was this group of Democrats in Wisconsin that were able to, over the course of 13 years, overturn some of the gerrymandering laws that the Republicans were able to facilitate that made Wisconsin basically a cannibalized state for the Republican Party, which brings it full circle to this conversation of, the institutionalized corruption, because Trump is getting his legal fees from the Republican Party, which I know is north of $50 million in light of what I guess he's over $500 million, $500 million in convictions and fines that he has to come up with. That it's going to create all sorts of other problems, which leads back to the other side of the conversation, which is, okay, well, where is he going to get the money? And of course, the first thing that comes to mind is all things Saudi Arabia, because they gave Jared Kushner $2 billion and Steve Mnuchin $4 billion. And yeah, institutionalized corruption. And in a previous life, maybe 30 years ago, that sort of news would have been catastrophic. And oh my God, you would have been like, this isn't the end of the world. And let me tell you, man, there would have been some major fracturing at that time period, but not now, because that's small potatoes. That's small potatoes compared to what it is that I've been revealing to you time immemorial through my 472 truth bomb riffs on Patrick Level Truth Bombs the Con. And of course, the motherlode blueprint revelation of all that is now free because all the American people buy our lies that you can discover at www.thecon.tv, which is basically phase one of the information that I've provided. And the other side, because I wasn't able to get season 2 of the con off the ground because the powers that be cannot allow this out there, and they cannot allow the American people to understand the system that we live in, which of course I created a podcast called The New Untouchables, and it lays out all that information. So without going into the stuff that I always go into, which I'm going to have to deviate, and I'm going to have to try another way to just pull out the crowbar and lift your skull and feed you this information to hopefully your CPU, your central processing unit computer, can just suddenly turn on the lights and you look around and you're like, oh my God, now I get it. And what we're trying to do with the Clean New Deal, first and foremost, is as it relates to the 2024 presidential election, what are our options? Well, we're looking pretty much at, again, it's going to be Biden, and there's no Democratic challenger. And as many people have pointed out, that anybody who wanted to come up in the Democratic Party to challenge Joe Biden, that there's just not going to be a challenge. There's not going to be debates. There's not going to be anyone that the Democratic Party is going to allow to have a seat at the table to challenge Biden in the electoral process that I've seen my entire life. And it's just simply Biden. And that's our choice. And of course, there's a lot of people concerned about Biden's age. There's a lot of people concerned about potentially World War III. There's a lot of people concerned and a lot of people horrified and angered by Biden's position vis-a-vis Palestinians and Gaza in other scenarios. And so, yeah, we're not going to have a democratic process, which of course means that the party fighting to save democracy is no longer functioning in the vein of democracy. Even though Rachel Maddow pointed out that these Democrats had used democracy for a 13-year time period, which happens to be my sort of period of struggle to bring you this information that I am. But she said, they finally won. And her point to Lawrence O'Donnell when they did this transition, as they always do, she said, when you're right, you have to keep fighting for right and just believe that one day you will be found out and made whole. Something along those lines. And yeah, I guess that's what I'm in the midst of. But Rachel Maddow is definitely one of my significant nemesis. And I am constantly critical of Rachel Maddow's positioning because, again, as it related to this audacity that everything is about Trump, that Trump is the only thing that determines the future of the world. Now, Trump, because of his relationship with Putin and because of some of these trajectories and things that have been going on for the last, let's call it 10 years at least, particularly as it relates to Saudi, is of course extremely disconcerting because who is going to shell out the money for Trump to be able to deal with these fines? And the collateral and all of the things he has to do to prevent from going bankrupt. And is that really going to be his priority because he's already gone through 6 bankruptcies? But how does that play out to now? I mean, he's basically in this situation because of the amount of, the high level of these fines. I mean, he is dangerously and perilously close to being bankrupt in a way that he can't get out of. I mean, it's not like it's the LLC and a couple of different, projects that he can walk away from. No, this is like his entire portfolio of real estate is going to have to be used as collateral to get the loans to be able to pay for these to be able to go and get to the next level of appeals. That's just part of the legal process. And meanwhile, of course, we've got the other 91 indictments, including treason and racketeering and everything else, and we'll see what happens with Fonnie Willis. But the point is that, yeah, I'm stupefied, and I have been for years and years, and I have seen, again, just like I had laid out, the evidence that in real time I'm being censored by Elon Musk's X because of what I printed, this posted about, Yulia Navalny. And the same thing has been going on to me at the highest levels with mainstream media. I, the biggest, most powerful corporations in the world, I believe, and this is definitely conspiracy theory, but it's rational conspiracy theory, considering all of the information I have that I can't touch because I can't talk about it because that's problematic and how I get this messaging out. So another thing I happened to print this morning, and it's kind of along the same lines, I came across this young woman who I found to be incredibly entertaining. Her humor was and satire was just cutting edge, and her delivery was magnificent. And she did a piece called The Grift Drift about Russell Brand that led that story to Alex Jones and all of this vast right wing sort of media complex that I guess is the kickback and the reaction to mainstream media, given what I just basically spoke to regarding Rachel Maddow as pretty much the tentpole in this particular juxtaposition. And her delivery was spot on. Her dialogue, her framing, her tempo, her empirical sort of layering to be able to emphasize certain scenarios that laid out the storyline and it showed us in real time that Russell Brand is completely the antithesis of what Russell Brand has been for over the past decade and a half. And there's a reason for that. And she lays out the qualifiers and makes a very, very compelling case as to who Russell Brand is and what I've, basically inferred and known just in my mind, because my mind every day, because I'm a producer and I've been in the edit base and I know how things work and I know geopolitics and communications and media and power. And so my mind already does what this girl did, just simulcast as I'm absorbing all of this information because it's just who I am at this stage of my life. But yet it was so helpful to watch what she had laid out, which was a very compelling and effective argument that basically shows the emperor's no clothes, and that it's all a grift. And I call all of these mechanisms and all of these different players tools in the fool circus, which of course by sort of extension, anybody who absorbs this and puts it at the front of their frontal lobe in terms of how they see the world, maybe their third eye, they are tools in the full circus, but on both sides of the equation. And going back to my sort of about this young, powerful, talented female person who put it all together, I was like, gosh, she's got a lot of talent. But then I looked in the credits to see who she was and what she was all about, and it was all put together by Media Matters. And it might be that she's just a hired actress, which would be a shame because I was hoping that here was a young woman who was incredibly aware of how the world works, that had the wherewithal and the DIY, right, do it yourself sort of initiative to be able to put all of these things together, because I don't edit my own work. I'm a producer. I hire editors. I don't have the technical ability to be able to edit everything. And if I did, maybe I would. But at this stage of the game, because you got to understand, there is no journalism anymore. There is no investigative journalism. There is no truth. There is only mainstream media, which is propaganda, and it's coming from somewhere for some purpose. And it's, by way of the presidential election, I've always stated that Rachel Maddow is not a journalist. She's not an anchor. She's not an honest purveyor of, sort of reacting to the world like maybe she once was with Air America, for example, long before she got into her spot at MSNBC. but she has been, and I've noticed this for at least over a decade. She is the communication director for the Democratic Party, a Democratic Party that is the Wall Street revolving door meritocracy that serves the legal profession, the accounting profession, the finance profession, the corporate professions that we used to think in America was kind of the strength, the pillar of American brilliance and genius, and provided the jobs and the innovations and all of these things that made America a superpower. But things have changed. It's 2024. It's so Orwellian, it's unbelievable. We are not in, that sort of sitcom. I'm reminded of Mary Tyler Moore, back in the 50s, where everybody just had character and charisma, and they were lovely people, and they were professionals, and they had great lives, and yet they could provide for their families, and everybody had kind of a common shared sort of outlook, purpose, objective, the whole thing. And again, our world has been fractured in the United States. The whole world has been fractured. But the continuity of this whole thing as it relates to Rachel Maddow, and then, of course, what I demonstrated about Elon Musk, and all things just hyperbolic manipulation, information of stories and narratives to make sure that you don't understand the world we live in, that bleeds into the 2024 presidential election, which we only have two choices, which, of course, I've already demonstrated. Joe Biden, and some of the concerns, particularly his age. But what that should tell anybody who is slightly concerned about Joe Biden is that really the presidency doesn't matter. It's safe to have what do they call Sleepy Joe, right? Is he Sleepy Joe? Not really. I mean, but at the same time, he's not at the top of his game. But even when he was at the top of the game, his game, who was Joe Biden? Well, Joe Biden was one of those guys who was part of the machinery of the Democratic Party that would ultimately, give rise and enable what became the prison industrial complex. There's always been his manner of being a senator from Delaware, where Delaware is was the LLC capital of the world. I think maybe Nevada might be up there at this stage, but and everything that is involved with that, not to mention, of course, his involvement with healthcare and credit card companies and all manner, shape, or form of what we would call the system. So whether or not Joe is, a dynamic president, a young guy who's going to, basically be pulling America forward with incredible vision and everything else. No, Joe Biden is just the last 4 to 5 decades and what we are and what we've become. And he's a safety sort of guy at the helm, at least PR wise, for that system. And that's the point of the Democratic Party right now. Do not look behind the curtains and understand what Patrick Lovell is telling you, first and foremost. And then Trump, Trump, Trump to me, and I've mentioned this on many, 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 many of my truth bombs, he is an abomination. Trump is so horrific. I used to think him as cartoon buffoonish, like the cover of Mad Magazine. And I used to like to ridicule him, and this is from 2016 onward. I've known Trump my whole life. And I've been ridiculing him my whole life, but I've been ridiculing all of the systems that enabled Trump to become Trump. So, for example, Trump initially was like fake media. And I always find that to be very interesting, right? Particularly towards the New York Times. But Trump was involved deeply with the National Enquirer. I mean, his partner, what was that guy's name who, like, not some of these names at the apex of some of these huge companies, like I'm reminded of Larry Fink at BlackRock, which is just like, God, who would keep that name, right? You'd think if you were one of the world's most powerful people, you should have changed your name a long time ago. And this guy who was the CEO and probably the owner of the National Enquirer, whose name I can't think of at the moment, but he was deeply involved with Trump from the 80s on. And Trump's been playing all of media the whole time, including eventually when he got his spot on the Apprentice, on NBC, produced by Mark. What's the is it Australian guy? I can't think of his. The guy's got so many huge, reality TV shows on CBS and NBC and everything else, and he's like one of the big monopoly guys when it comes to that form of television programming. But he created the Apprentice, and that provided a lot of credibility for Donald Trump because as he was literally doing this fun little show where people would compete and maybe for his favor, and the whole catchphrase was "you're fired," but at the same time they were just like little games, little entrepreneurial activities to see who could perform the best in the length of the show. To get to the boardroom and have this dramatic moment of Trump, overseeing everyone and being like, "You're fired," right? And all of the drama that's associated with that. But meanwhile, Trump, the whole time, his organization was involved with money laundering and real estate with bad actors behind the scenes. And it was just a front for a massive global racketeering enterprise. And yeah, NBC was complicit in that. And then later we saw, for example, the president of CBS, Les Moonves, say, yeah, we're giving Trump all of this airtime because he's good for ratings. So we got hundreds of millions of dollars of basically free advertising on mainstream networks, given kind of the parable that I've just laid out, the foundation, the structure, and the whole deal, which again is manipulation. And CNN did the same thing. Jeff Zucker had admitted that, yeah, Trump was good for ratings. And so then now here we are in 2024, where all of those same people are like, oh my God, we let the genie out of the bottle. I mean, you can't get the toothpaste back in the tube. It's like, my God, what have we done? We played roulette with democracy. This guy is corrupt up to his gills, playing ball with Saudi Arabia and Putin. And oh my God, institutional corruption like Rachel Maddow laid out last night. And the world's coming to an end. And yet, like, another revelation of how I get throttled down when I talk about the truth. But when I just say small little quips on other threads on X, I get 30,000 views. I happen to mention on Lawrence Tribe's thread the other day, but wait a second, isn't what Trump doing what the entire financial system is doing? Yeah. Institutional corruption. So your choices are between a sellout, treacherous, treasonous, rapist by definition, lying scoundrel who will step on anybody and anything to get his because he's Don the con and he's been playing the mob game for 4 decades against the system. Those are our choices in 2024. Meanwhile, all of the problems that we've had for the past 50 years are the same problems. And they're not getting any easier to solve. And it seems to me like the system itself and these gigantic global apparatuses around the world are just basically positioning for World War III. And who does that help? What problem does it solve? It doesn't. It just means what most of you should already know is that you're expendable. Doesn't matter what ideology you have. It doesn't matter what color you are. It doesn't matter what gender you are. It doesn't matter what religion you are. You either have a lot of money, and if you're at the top 0.001%, you have all the power, or you don't. And this system, might reach down to potentially the top 10% that it works for because of all of the mechanics of everything that I've laid out. But that's a whole lot of people it's not working for. So what do we do? What is the solution? Because obviously what I just laid out is not a solution. It's just a perpetuation of the struggle for power. And as I've laid out in many of my truth bombs, really what this is, I think, is the new Confederacy versus the new robber barons battling over control of the Iron Throne. And if you get the Iron Throne, which is the White House and Congress, and of course SCOTUS, all of which are corrupt. And if you don't know that, please turn on the light. You get the Iron Bank, which is the Federal Reserve. And I promise you, that's the most important piece of the puzzle. But put that aside, because all of that really isn't what you're dealing with. Most of you are dealing with, you're trying to keep your nostril above the water. And you're just trying to survive, to provide for your family, working 2 to 3 jobs. where all of the prices have gone up and you're barely hanging on by your fingertips. And when you pass that guy who's out homeless in the street, you look at him with contempt, but you know, in the back of your head, you're not that far away because your house costs a monumental amount and you don't want to lose it. And you can't just skip out on your house because it's the only thing of value you have. And you're into credit card debt up to your eyeballs and you're trying to keep your family, above water, and it's drowning you. And you're like hustling on the gerbil wheel to keep moving, to keep producing, to keep doing what you can. And you look around and you're like, okay, well, this establishment put me in this bind, so I'm going to go with the sort of anti-establishment guy for all of his faults. That accounts for a large amount of people out there. The other people, they're like, okay, well, look, man, I don't like this geopolitical, terrorism and this evil and yada, yada, yada. And, that's going to be my center position. So I can't go with these guys. Look, guys, we're all fractured for a reason. Okay. When you're pointing the finger at everybody else, you're not pointing the finger at the problem, which is the situation. But how do we fix it? Well, we've got to get a presidential candidate because really the presidential election is the only national convention election that exists. Everything else is regional, statewide, local, blah, blah, blah. It's the only national election. And we have to get and find a presidential candidate that understands what is actually going on and then has a plan to fix it. We have the plan, myself and my colleagues, which we've been laying out, and I will try to lay out in a very abbreviated manner, but hopefully to speak to what is important to you. So first and foremost, the question should always be, like Bill Clinton had said back in the 80s, 90s, it's the economy, stupid. So what would improve your life? Would working 3 jobs apiece with you and your spouse to be in credit card debt up the wazoo to barely hang on to your assets that you have, is that the best way through this? What if you had one job that actually had the mean, what we call the market mean average of someone that has working one job in one location for a year straight, what the market mean average is throughout the United States, which is obviously at different locations. It's more expensive in Seattle, in New York, and Los Angeles, and Miami than it is in a lot of the other places throughout the country. But therein lies the market median, which is $60,000. What we want to create and establish is a market median baseline to where there is a jobs guarantee, to where if you want to get out of the 3 jobs that you're working to hang on by your fingertips, that there will be a pool of opportunities to rebuild the infrastructure of the United States and our energy paradigm, in which you would also get trained in that capacity to be able to have one job at that income level to be able to facilitate what the country has to do anyway. That would be step 1 of the Clean New Deal, is to provide the opportunity of a jobs guarantee program to where people could make the median market median income of $60,000 a year, working in the capacity of a renewable energy transition. That would be our first step. Now, our second step, considering so many people are in debt and struggling to maintain that debt on top of everything else that they've got to create, and a big part of it is student debt. Yeah, we could have a plan to basically create I know you're all thinking about it and you're all on the edge of your seats because you're saying just end student debt, just write it off. But there's a notion that I've heard from an economist that actually used to be part of many cultures throughout human history that had to do this from time to time in transitions because sometimes debt, commoditization debt, is not sustainable. In this particular case, I feel that ideologically, and I know that there's a lot of people out there who put themselves through school, who paid off their student debt, who did things where they literally did it right and they made their own choices and they went into a job, whether it was software engineering, whether it was to become an attorney or a professional or maybe a veterinarian or something else, to where they had huge student debt that they paid off. And it's an incredible struggle and it's incredibly important. But meanwhile, there's been a transition in the United States over the course of the last 40 years where we basically offshored and outsourced the middle class. We destroyed the infrastructure of the United States. We did not continue to produce that which we consume. That's globalism. Some people call it neoliberalism. It's both, to where we can produce a majority of our products that we consume in Asia, and then, of course, a lot of our energy overseas. And we basically became the middleman. But what that did is it hollowed out the middle class. And so that led people with college educations, maybe in education, maybe in literature, maybe in English, maybe very, very important skill sets, quite frankly, but maybe that don't find the necessity, the opportunities in the current job market because of the way we've reconfigured our economy. We transitioned out of a productive economy in the 80s to a service economy, which lowered the jobs and we offshored and outsourced. And the only way you could really maintain your money is to take everything you had and throw it in the market to try to offset your losses with what your income would be. So that was part of the transition in the 80s and the 90s, and blew up in the 2000s because it doesn't have equilibrium and it doesn't work. It's not supply and demand, which is part and parcel to what I've been trying to illuminate to you for a long time. But again, that's in my 472 truth bombs that you can discover, and you can just dive in and you can get more information than you could possibly ever know. But that's not the subject of this piece. First, we're going to create a jobs guarantee situation where the national median income is going to be able to provide a productive economy in transition to a clean, renewable economy. And in doing so, we think that it makes a whole lot of sense to write off student debt, debt that was aggregated for a job market that had been hollowed out a long time ago. In fact, maybe some people could say, well, look, we should identify what jobs are actually needed in the economy and then, force people into, studying for those types of careers. I'm not about that because I believe in freedom. I believe you have to choose to do what you want to do. But I think that it makes sense based on the amount of debt that you can't really have a consumer society when people can no longer consume. They're paying for something that didn't pay off, and was that their choice? Yeah. Did they fail? Yeah. Were they sold a bag of goods? Maybe. Did they make bad choices? Maybe. Does it really matter in the grand scheme of things because we're in desperate straits? Not really if we want to rebuild the paradigm, which is what we're doing with the Clean New Deal. So that's part of it. The other part of it is a debt jubilee. I mean, everybody is up to their eyeballs in credit card debt, and they can't keep it going. I mean, the national debt is 33 trillion. So too is our consumer debt, 33 trillion. Why? Because people are chasing the illusion of the American dream, buying into houses were hyperinflated that don't match the mechanics of supply and demand in markets because of all of the manipulation. And then also, credit card companies and the system, they depend on debt. They depend on you being on the debt wheel. That's how they make money. That's how they finance themselves. That's how we perpetually finance. Think back to what President Bush said during the Gulf War, or actually it was the Iraq War. He said, don't worry about you being involved or being, drafted into the military. All we need you to do is consume, just spend. That's what we did while we were fighting a two-front war that lasted 20 years. And we had a slight reprieve 2 years ago when we got out of Afghanistan. And now we're back into it with everything that's happening in the Middle East, and of course, what's happening in Ukraine, which could snowball into something much bigger. So I guess, maybe the lesson is you should have gotten a job working as a military contractor so that you could live in a Richie Rich estate in Potomac, Maryland, which I've seen. And I'm being cynical and I'm being slightly satirical. And obviously, I'm exposing how ridiculous that is. Yeah, the growth economy, if you were to look back 20, 35 years, if I would have known what I would have known, yeah, I would have gone to go work for a military contractor, or I would have gone into real estate because of all of the tricks I know. But that's besides the point. But we have to just basically kind of create a clean new slate. We've got to be like, look, man, this debt ain't working and it's not sustainable, and it is serviceable and it is sustainable if you get into the mechanics of certain economic understanding. But at the same time, it's all fiction anyway. It really is. It truly is. Does money grow on trees? It doesn't for you. That's what you need to know. However you interpret that is however you interpret it. But that's part of the big grift. And drift to grift, right? The grift drift, I think, is what that one young woman who was an actress regarding Russell Brand had pointed out so poignantly and brilliantly. So those are three top line elements, and then really the last piece of the puzzle, and most of this was orchestrated and laid out by my colleague, a gentleman by the name of Kevin Howard, who I appreciate, and I think it's a great strategy to lay these out. But it's the notion is to end debt peonage. The big challenge of all of the debt write-off and everything that goes on is you get into a fundamental challenge to the nature of the infrastructure of our ethical, moral, and principled lives as a free citizen in a free country. When you start to think about, well, look, you're offered credit for a reason, and finance is extremely important to the vitality of companies, and it's a brilliant concept when it works the right way. When all of the elements, such as underwriting and shall we say, capacity and capability of borrowers to be able to pay in debt service based on the growing mechanics of a business. I mean, fundamentally, all of these things make so much sense, but they're completely out of whack now because of what's happened with the Federal Reserve and financialization and many of these other things that my 472 truth bombs go into. But the bottom line is we have to create a brand new start. We really do. We have to create a situation to where we can elect a president who is going to take this platform to basically drive home to the American people that the lesser of two evil choices between these two systems that have complete control, which I call tyranny or the misery of tyranny, has complete control and iron grip that leads to fill in your favorite sort of motif from throughout history. Debt bondage, slavery, the nature of indentured servitude, all of these things that mankind had to break over the course of 1,000 years, quite frankly. In the 1700s was when that really started to snowball into a transition from the aristocracy into capitalism that coincided with this nation, the United States, that created separation of powers to help manifest American, or I would say individual dynamism, to be able to create miracles. And it did, compared to what the previous systems did. And then there was a lot that took place after. We're at another turning point in history to where if we don't, at this moment, grab the opportunity by the throat and drive this whole thing forward, because we have to have tens of millions of people who aren't benefiting from the system of thievery. They're a bunch of pirates, but legal pirates that have complete control. He who has the world gold makes the rules. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. When a group of men discover plunder, they create a legal code to authorize it and a moral code to glorify it. This is all history. This is what mankind has done over and over and over. And I'll draw a comparison to one of my favorite movies of all time. And when I watched it 100 times in the 80s, I always was left feeling with this sort of yearning for a closure on this because I'm referring to a movie called The Wall by Pink Floyd, Roger Waters, his genius, which manifests all of these sort of fundamental shifts throughout history and the psychology of people and individual versus collectivism and all of these different things that leads to liberty and freedom to fascism. And it's the sort of back and forth of this whole thing. And I always wanted an ending, a conclusion. I always wanted something that t- took all the collective lessons and then moved forward from them to create a better day that everybody understood. But the irony of life is that we regenerate ourselves and we generate people, and people have certain needs in psychology, and this just keeps happening over and over and over and over. I'm 55 years old. I can't believe I have to lecture this or what do I call these truth bombs? There's some sort of combination of lecturing of what does a preacher do when he preaches? I say it all the time. It's not just preaching. It's from the pulpit, but lecturing and preaching, whatever. And then ultimately, it comes down to and therapy in some ways for me. But listen, guys, we're at a monumental situation where the pathways seem to be leading to World War III and a continuation and a perpetuation of fossil fuel and all of these different things that have created all of these problems for the last 30 to 50 years. I mean, on overdrive, particularly 9/11 forward. And we got to turn the page, man. We got to recreate a whole new infrastructure. And the only way we can do that, especially in a consumption society that's based on, the movement of peoples and education and all of these other types of things to create a dynamic workforce and so forth. But you have to have a national vision. We have to get off of fossil fuels. We have got to recreate a energy paradigm in the United States, which would require millions and millions of people working in this capacity in a way that they could actually earn a living wage to provide for their family. That's what we're laying out. And to get rid of debt peonage so that we start fresh and then we move forward. That's where we start. It's called the Clean New Deal. We need tens of millions to join us, and we need to move fast because the more people that get on board, the more people that share this, that spread this, that help us. I've got a lot more answers about the other criminal activity behind the scenes that eventually the Clean New Deal is going to eradicate as well. I call it a tidal wave populist crusade to purge corruption. That's what we have to do. So thank you for listening. Rise, roar, revolt. Failure is not an option. When you have the truth, you're bulletproof. This is the righteous grind. Onwards and upwards.